of the virus in bats and what's out there now is very, very strongly leaning towards this could not have been artificially or deliberately manipulated.
This question about the Wuhan.
Oh, okay, Tony. Back that bus up. The very, very strong evidence that this could not have been artificially manipulated. Actually, the opposite is completely the case. And he knows that. He's more in the position to know this than anybody. There are endless videos. Go on YouTube, search Fauci gain of function. You can find him leading seminars, talking to conventions of people who are actually engaged in gain of function research back in 2015, 14, 13. Gain of function's been a big part of his life. He's been proponent of it. His organization's been funding it. I'm sure he knows exactly what it's all about. This statement from him at this point in time is not just evasive. It's completely, obviously false information from this gentleman. So hold on to that because we're going to ask some questions about what that ought to mean. And by the way, we can go into this just a little bit more on the Fauci side because get this drawing tool back. April 3rd, 2020, he says, I think we should shut down those things, that's the wet markets in China, right away. It boggles my mind how when we have so many diseases that emanate out of that unusual human-animal interface that we don't just shut it down. Fauci told Kilmeade, what we're going through right now is a direct result of that. So you can see the spin cycle here. You have all the media is just absolutely 100% convincing you that you're a nut, that you might as well be drinking bleach, that it's a conspiracy theory, that nobody agrees with this idea that it could have been anything but natural. And then you have Fauci here in April saying, hey, you know what? This thing must have come from a wet market. We're sure about that. By the way, we already had solid data from China by then saying that it didn't come from the wet market, that they had evidence that it had originated earlier than that. Patient zero was never isolated to the wet market, patient zero being the first identified case of COVID. Very important. You find patient zero, good chance of figuring out where this thing came from. So he knew that this was actually false at the time, knew that this did not come from the wet market, knew that, but said this anyway. April 17th, Fauci said, there was a study recently that we can make available to you where a group of highly qualified evolutionary virologists looked at the sequences of the novel coronavirus and the sequences in bats as they evolve and the mutations that it took to get to the point where it is now is totally consistent with a jump of a species from an animal to a human. Actually, that's not true. It's not even close to true. In fact, the sequences have a lot of interesting data in them, which we surfaced way back a long time ago, including this one. Note to journalists, this is called PRRA. This is a sequence. Here we have SARS-CoV-2, this closest known relative, which may or may not have been a fictitious thing because it's just a sequence in a database that the WIV released. But this is called the RATG13, the RATG13 so-called sequence. But we've got the pangolin coronaviruses here. We've got the human SARS-CoV. That's classic SARS. We've got these bat SARS-CoV related things. These sequences across all of these viruses line up perfectly. They're always the same, except for this little insert right here, PRRA. That's a sequence of 4 amino acids. That would have been a 12 nucleotide insert into the genomic structure, and that is a very odd sequence. Why? Because that's called a polybasic furin cleavage site. It's a very highly known thing that's put in to viruses for gain-of-function research because that furin cleavage site, furin's a human, we have a lot of circulating protease in our body, and that protease, when it clips that particular sequence, it makes the virus get into the cell hundreds, if not thousands of times more efficiently and effectively. So that sequence right there, when Tony said, hey, all of our virologists are looking and saying the sequence clearly say this came from an animal to a human, we don't have any natural analog of human SARS-CoV-2. There's nothing in nature that's close to it that has that sequence, but that sequence is put in all the time by gain-of-function researchers, and including the H1N1 virus, which is an influenza virus. They put that sequence in, or something very much like it, and it scared the bejesus out of everybody to the point that under the Obama administration, they terminated gain-of-function research because it was so scary. If that virus had escaped from the lab, that particular influenza, that would have been the Spanish flu times 10 in terms of impact. Anyway, so that's the sequence data. It was sitting there. And by the way, just to show you, this is SARS-CoV-2, this little clad of pink right here. There's some that little wedge right there. Here are all of its closest relatives. So this is we're looking at a family tree. This is like saying, you know, everybody in my family is a bit like I am, Swedish, sort of fair-skinned, blue-eyed, and this is our family tree going back like 8 generations, and then all of a sudden there's a baby born in my family, which has completely different features from anything we might have, like very dark skin or something like that, or a very different eye color structure, or is just massively taller and everybody in my family is short, or vice versa. Just it didn't share the family structure from the family tree. So nobody has an explanation for why this thing all by itself, way out there, is parked all by itself. You can't. Your first instinct ought to be, this looks a little fake. It doesn't look natural. Your first instinct should not be, hey, this totally says it's natural. But that's the direction things went.